I'm going to start by making a tint of a primary color. The primary color I chose is magenta, so for this first scale, I need magenta and white. You can use any primary color you want. At each table, you're gonna have one paintbrush that everyone uses to just like scoop white paint out of the white jar. So no other paintbrush should go in here, and this paintbrush should not touch any other color. What I want to do is I want to scrape out, kind of like a spoon, I'm like scooping up a bunch of white paint, and I'm going to add it to my mixing tray in half. Right now we're mixing the color that is in the middle. Now that I've got my medium value, I'm gonna scoop from my own mixing tray and add a lot of white into my pink, and I'm looking for a super light value of that primary color. And then once I have that version, I'm gonna paint it in between the medium and the white. And then for my tint that is kind of medium dark, I'm actually just gonna take a scoop of this lighter shade and add it right to my primary color. And if it looks almost exactly like my medium shade, I can just add more of the magenta. Then I will paint that right here. So for the shade, I washed out all of my brushes and I turned my mixing tray to the empty side. And I'm gonna use that red magenta brush to scoop out a bunch of magenta to do my shades. And then same with the black. I'm gonna scoop out and put some black paint right on my palette that I can use to mix the shades. With the tint, we had to add kind of like half and half, white and magenta, to get that medium tint. For the shades, the black is very powerful. So you are not gonna wanna add half and half. It is always easier to add a little bit more black than it is to like try and take something that's way too dark and make it lighter. So I'm just gonna start off with a small amount of black. And then I'm gonna take half of my medium shade and move it into another circle. And to make the darker shade, I'll add black to my medium shade, and to make the lighter shade, I'll add a little bit more magenta. I've got clean brushes, fresh water, and I scrubbed my mixing tray off really good. I want to make sure that I dry my brushes off before I start mixing paint again. And then I'm also going to use one of our like old paint towels to dry off the mixing tray. That way I don't get water mixed in with my paint. In order to do the intensity scale, I'm gonna start on this side by painting it magenta, the same as the other two. But then on the other end of the scale, I need to figure out what the complementary color is. So when I'm looking at a color wheel, the complementary color is the color that is straight across from it. So for magenta, my complementary color is gonna be green. For cyan, my complementary color would be orange. And then for yellow, it would be purple. So I've already got my magenta scooped out. What I need to do is I need to mix up green, and I need there to be enough green mixed up that I will be able to use it to mix 3 other hues. So I'm gonna start with, I scooped out a big scoop of yellow, and then I'll mix in some cyan to get my green. I've got my green mixed up, and I painted my green on one end of the scale and my magenta on the other end of the scale. And I'm not gonna wash off this brush. I'm gonna just use it to scrape out some green and put it into another circle so I can start to mix up this next hue or color. The wonderful thing about complementary colors is that when you paint them at their full intensity side by side, they really make each other pop. They make each other look brighter. The other really nice thing about complementary colors is that when you mix them together, they kind of make the color look more natural. So this shade of green is not a shade of green that I would see in nature. If I wanted to paint a tree or grass, I would need to make the green less intense. And the way that I'm gonna do that is by adding some red. And since I'm only trying to make it a little bit less intense, I'm not gonna add very much red at all, just a little. Now I've got a much more natural looking green. That's a green that I could use to paint moss or a lizard. You're gonna paint that less intense hue right next to the bright green. I'm gonna do the same thing with the red. I'm gonna scoop out a big scoop of magenta. And if I wanted to paint a berry or the feathers on a bird, that would be too intense of a color to find in nature. So in order to make it less intense, a little bit more dull, I'm gonna take a little bit of green and mix it in. This is something that you'll learn more about if you take painting too, but you can mix any shade of brown using different amounts, different ratios of all 3 of the primary colors. So this color that I'm mixing right now, it's got magenta from the magenta, which is a primary color, and then it also has yellow and blue from the green. So I have all 3 of those primary colors represented, and when I mix them together, I get a really beautiful brown. And that brown is gonna be the color that you put right in the middle. So I have all 3 of my scales done. I've got my tint, my shade, and my intensity. And depending on if you choose to use acrylics in the future, now you know how to do all of these things.